Okay, it's the 12th of September 2020. We're here with the vessel formerly known as Seabird, we're now calling Pandora, on a smoky forest fire day in the boatyard at Everett, Washington. And I want to review what we've done so far, what's going on, and document the current state and document the things we're going to be covering up. So this is the starboard chine abaft the beam was leaking along pretty much its whole length. The caulk is gone from that seam, so we're opening that seam. We just had the supports moved away from the chine by the boatyard crew, and we're pulling the bungs along that line. We're going to open the seam, recaulk it, close it back up, and then fabricate using that piece of white oak new chine rub rail to replace the one that's eroded away here. This is the old one. It's in pretty bad shape. You can see the wood's deteriorated. So we'll have a new rub rail for that place. Alright, we got the propeller shafts back in. These struts pinked really badly. So I didn't want to replace them. They're really expensive to have made, like $1,000 a piece. But they're badly pinked. Those are the old screws. They're a little bit eroded. Okay. So with the fuel tank, so there's the fuel tank. It goes athwart these stringers here. When it's in place, access to the lazarette back here is really very restricted. Very difficult to get down in here, particularly for my fat old ass. So here's some things that we've been doing back here. First of all, the steering cable from the upper control station was deteriorated. We've discarded that and it's no longer manufactured. So we're going to leave the upper control station disconnected for the time being and probably put in a hydraulic system before it's all said and done. The rack steering system is in pretty good condition. We'll just leave that as is. I've completely rewired DC primary, DC secondary, all the control wiring, all the AC wiring, not the AC wiring. Because from here, this is the shore power connection. That cable was in good shape, runs along that stringer. I've run in a new cable. This will be for the stern light, the bilge blower, stern light, and trim pump, and also a circuit for a work light back here. That'll all run through that cable. So the galvanic ground network was basically scrap as found. So that's being replaced with all new wire. Fitted a galvanic ground bus here, just forward of the fuel tank. Previous owner had built the DC ground bus up there on the firewall. I've ripped out I've ripped out all of the old primary wiring. This has all been put. I've repurposed some of it. You can see the color code's kind of a mess. I've not yet put the covers in. I'm going to use plexiglass covers for the switches. Okay, the shaft logs and strut bases and rudder post bolt blocks. All of this had very severe galvanic rot. Just horrible. None of it was found in the survey because the fuel tank was in the way. So what I've got here is epoxy. I dug out all the rot, poured epoxy in, make a new foundation, and then I've just caulked and screwed. These are 1-inch number 10 screws with the number 2 square drive holding this down. So the shaft logs are back in place, seals are back in place. New couplings. This is a new shaft on the starboard side, original shaft on the port side with a renewal kit on the seal over there. So new galvanic ground networks going in with green wire. Battery. We had to rebuild the forward battery box. That's new. New wood and plastic. Dress these cables. So the ground side of the starter circuit, the primary ground, runs from the block here, from the bell housing, to the negative terminal of this battery, to the negative terminal of that battery, over to that post, and then to the bell housing on the support engine. New valve on the starboard side. The old valve handle had rotted away. Original on the port. The galvanic grounds for those through hulls were held on by hose clamps on bare wire, and so I've got to design and install some new way of anchoring that. There are no through bolts on those through hulls to use, so that's TBD. Let's see, what else do you need to see back here right now? Okay, fuel on this side is as found from the original, from the previous owner. They put this water separator here. On the opposite side, port side, there was no fuel strainer, there's no carburetor. This engine was not working when we took possession due to, well, we'll go into that probably in another video, but basically they put a hole in the oil pan that we're going to have to repair, and that's not yet done. But there was no fuel filter or water separator on this side, so I put one in here. New DC wiring for the engine controls. These were just open bundles of wire from the factory, connectorized but otherwise open, going to a wiring panel that was mounted to the engine here. I've moved that to this support structure. So the way these are going to work is we're going to come off the battery. So the battery terminal will come from the selector switch to the top post here. Bottom post goes to the starter. Starter switch lands here. We're going to run a solid heavy gauge wire from the alternator to here, and from here to the circuit breaker, which is marked for battery side on the bottom, load side on the top. There's a reset button underneath should they ever pop, and then this will run to our bus on a per engine basis. So each engine, as I've rebuilt the instrument panel, each engine's instrument cluster is powered from its own battery, from its own selected power source. So they're really two independent instrument clusters. We'll talk about that wiring in another entry. So what else do you need to know about what we're going to cover up here? So we're covering all this. We'll be covering all this up once I get with the fuel tank. Once I get once I get it all put back together. So we got to mount the rudder posts, install the galvanic ground network. The yard guys like to put us in with the nose up a little bit. So in the yard, this bilge pump ends up doing most of the work removing rainwater. Bilge pumps have their own multi-conductor cable running to that cluster of junk. There is the manual automatic control switch, off manual automatic control switches on the firewall there by the galley. So there's two switches there, one for this aft fuel pump, and then at normal trim, the fuel pump up there under the cabin sole amidships ends up taking most of the load. AC wiring runs from the shore power connector to the port side bench. So under the bench is with the compartment where the AC distribution panel and the inverter live there. The DC cables for the inverter are meant to go to the third selector switch there. That's currently uninstalled because I ripped everything out when I realized that it was all wrong. Okay, we did replace the throttle cable from the lower control station. That's new. All the other control cables except for that one steering cable were in serviceable condition. Let's see, what else do you need to know? Your transmission cooling, heat exchangers. You've got a dual pocket freshwater pump. One circuit goes into the engine's cooling galleries. The other side comes back here, goes through this heat exchanger down to a Y, which splits it and comes back up to these fittings on the risers that feed the exhaust manifolds, cooling, and then off the front of that, off the front of the manifolds comes into this Y adapter. This is your bypass, thermostat bypass. All that comes back here to the upper port on the heat exchanger. So the upper freshwater port on the heat exchanger. When you take the fill cap off the heat exchanger, you should be able to see flow over the plate in there. The lower port of that feeds down and back to the inlet Y of the I'm sorry, that's not the bypass. This is the normal flow path from the thermostat. This is the bypass that runs down the port side of the engine to a four-way Y, which takes the bypass plus the outlet of the freshwater side of the heat exchanger plus takes those two as sources, and it has two outlets that go up into the two inlets at the bottom of the two pocket pump there. So that's the cold water path. The raw water path in from the seacock into the inlet side of the pump. Which is the inlet, which is the outlet, depends on which rotation you're on. So on the right-hand rotation engine, the inlet is on the top outboard, the port side. That's reversed on the other engine. So the outlet is going to come off of there, come up into the heat exchanger's seawater port. The heat exchanger has two seawater outlets, and those feed into the wet exhaust nozzles. So that's the water path. Those DC circuit breakers come off of the battery charger. We have a good, advanced, modern battery charger. Under under the sink. It's in the aftmost compartment of the galley. What else do you need to there were no overflow tanks when we took possession, so I fitted those. So there's a pressure retaining cap on the freshwater side, just like an automobile radiator. So these are just automotive overflow tanks. These PSS seals have a riser. This is just a riser. See that? That basically lets the air out of the seal so that it has cooling water against the seal face all the time. What else is going on here? So we have a new carburetor on this side. We'll have one on the other side too. Electric choke. Your timing marks, pretty hard to see in here. I'm going to try and paint that. It's on the back. It's on the flywheel here, not on the harmonic balancer. The fronts of these engines are right up against that firewall. They're really hard to work up there. Okay, I think I'm going to stop this video. Alright, we got the seam open. These screws spun. You can see that. There's a nail here that doesn't want to budge. This is kind of eroded a little bit. There was a bunch of dry caulk in there. As you can see, just recording this on video. These are all nails, copper nails. And you can see in here, the old caulk is just completely desiccated, coming out in flakes. So we're going to have to brush all that out, lather in some new, and close it back up. But this was definitely a job that needed to be done. This upper seam, I don't know that we're going to be able to open it very far. We're just going to have to count on caulk forcing its way into that T-joint between the chine log inside, the outer skin plywood, and the bottom plywood. There's a T behind this that will be filled with caulk from the bottom. And but that's where it was leaking. The water was leaking up through that T and out over the top of the chine log mostly. So this is going to do this without completely stripping the strakes. Of course, the next strake, the strakes are lapped from the outside in, so we'd have to remove all three strakes if we wanted to fully remove this one. No, I'm not going to try to do that. We're going to try and get her floating. There she sits. The interior structure, this is all engine compartment. To this through hull is the sink drain from the galley, from the head. You can see the textured glass. The forward bulkhead of the head is here, and then this is all galley table structure with all the drawers and stuff under it. So getting in behind that is hard. Getting in behind the galley, there's a panel in there that we have to remove. Sorry, getting in behind the head inner liner would not be too terribly hard. We're going to try and stop right here where we've got some original seal that doesn't look too bad, and I never noted any leakage that far forward while we were afloat. Whereas it was coming up over that chine log, hot and heavy. So that's the progress for the day. We're gonna get out of the smoke and back into an air-conditioned space, I think, before we get asthma, emphysema. Ain't nobody got time for that. See y'all.